October 25, 1972. Mexico City. 2,230 meters above sea level. The air is so thin it cuts your aerodynamic drag in half. But it also strangles your lungs. A 27-year-old Belgian named Eddy Merckx is alone on a wooden velodrome. He is riding a drilled-out steel bicycle that weighs less than 6 kilograms. No aero helmet, no power meter, no skin suit, just wool, leather, and a man chasing a number nobody believed could exist. When he finally stops, his face is dark, almost purple. He has just covered 49 kilometers and 431 meters in exactly 60 minutes, the hardest hour of his life. Years later, he will tell a journalist these exact words. The hour record demands a total effort, permanent and intense. I will never try it again. Now fast forward 53 years. Tadej Pogacar is climbing Plateau de Bale in the French Pyrenees. His scientists estimate he is producing 442 watts for 40 straight minutes. With a pair of lungs that researchers believe push past 90 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram per minute. That number sits at the absolute ceiling of what evolution allows a human being to do. So I want to ask you something. What if we swapped them? What if we put Eddy Merckx, peak Cannibal 1972, on Pogacar's 6.8 kilogram carbon machine with modern nutrition, modern recovery, modern everything? And what if we did the opposite? What if we dropped Pogacar back to 1972? Same body, same mind, and made him eat what they ate, ride what they rode, and crash with what they crashed in. I am Sebastian. This is the injury breakdown. And what we are about to investigate is not a fantasy. It is a controlled experiment in human physiology. Stay with me. Because the part nobody talks about is the injuries. Let us start with the bodies. Merckx at his peak stood 1.82 meters and weighed between 72 and 75 kilograms. His VO2 max, the gold standard measure of how much oxygen your body can pump and process per minute, sat somewhere around 80 to 85 milliliters per kilogram per minute. The original Roma test from 1968 was never fully published, so historians treat that number with caution. But here is what is not in dispute. In 1974, Eddy Merckx raced 93 days. He covered almost 16,000 kilometers of pure competition, not training, racing. His biographer estimates he rode 45,000 miles a year in his dominant seasons. That is 72,000 kilometers. In 1 year, Pogačar races 60 to 80 days a year, carefully selected, altitude camps in between, power files reviewed by metabolic scientists. Two completely different definitions of what it means to be a professional cyclist. Now here is the modern science. A peer-reviewed paper in the Journal of Science and Cycling modeled Pogačar's 2024 climb of Plateau de Bale using actual course data and validated power files. The result: 442 watts, plus or minus 15, for nearly 40 minutes. At his race weight of 66 kilograms, that is 6.8 watts per kilogram, sustained. In the final hour of a mountain stage where he had already burned through 4,000 kilojoules of work. The author concludes that Pogačar's race day VO2 max likely exceeds 90 milliliters per kilogram per minute, possibly as high as 96. So who wins on the engine? Wait, do not answer yet, because there is one more name we need on the table. Miguel Indurain. His career VO2 max was reported at 88. His resting heart rate, 28 beats per minute. Most people listening to this right now are sitting still at 60 or 70. The engines of the all-time greats are not as different as the romance suggests. Merckx, Indurain, Pogačar. They are the same species of monster. The variable that has changed is not the human. It is everything around the human. And nothing proves that more brutally than what happened on the 9th of September, 1969, at a velodrome in Blois, France. A Derny race. Motorbike-paced events behind small motorcycles, hugely popular at the time. Merckx, 24 years old, at the absolute peak of his powers, drafting behind his pacer Fernand Wamst. Something goes wrong on the wooden boards. Wamst is killed instantly. Merckx is thrown across the track. Head injuries, spinal injuries. And this is the detail that haunts every physical therapist who studies his career: a twisted pelvis. Years later, Merckx said it himself. From that day, cycling became suffering. I was never as strong again in the mountains. Think about what that means. The greatest cyclist of the 20th century spent the rest of his career riding with a pelvic asymmetry that no 1970s bike fitter could detect, let alone correct. He carried an Allen key in his jersey pocket so he could stop mid-race and adjust his saddle. He was chasing a position his bones no longer allowed him to hold. Today, Pogačar's saddle is set by motion capture cameras and pressure mapping technology with a team of biomechanists who screen for the exact kind of pelvic dysfunction Merckx lived with every single day of his career. That is one variable. Now let us add the machine. A high-end steel road frame from the 1970s, like the Colnago Merckx raced, weighs about 1,400 to 1,600 grams. A modern carbon frame, 900 to 1,000 grams. Add heavier forks, heavier wheels, heavier components. A complete 1970s road bike comes in around 9.5 kilograms. A modern tour-winning bike, like Pogačar's Colnago 5.4 RS, is built right at the UCI minimum, 6.8 kilograms. On a steep climb, that 2.5 kilogram difference is worth 15 to 20 watts, saved at the same speed. Now layer aerodynamics on top. A modern aero helmet versus the old vented design. Wind tunnel testing says 8 to 12 watts saved at 40 kilometers per hour. Deep aero wheels versus 70s box section rims. Around 6 watts. A modern skin suit versus a wool jersey. Up to 24 watts. At 45 kilometers per hour on the flat, a modern tour rider can be 40 to 60 watts faster than a 1970s rider producing the exact same power. 40 to 60 watts. That is an entire training zone. That is the difference between being dropped on the final climb and dancing on the pedals to the finish line. So if you just hand Eddy Merckx a Pogačar bike, you are not handing him a better bicycle. You are handing him a second engine. But we have not even talked about the food yet. In 1924, the journalist Albert Londres interviewed the Pélissier brothers during the Tour de France. They opened a small bag and showed him what they used to survive the race. Cocaine for the eyes, chloroform for the gums, strychnine, yes, the poison, to dull the pain and stay awake. The article was called The Convicts of the Road. It was the first written confession that what these men were doing was not nutrition. It was chemical survival. By Merckx's era, 50 years later, the menu had changed but the philosophy had not. Riders ate steak in the morning, rice pudding mid-stage, Coca-Cola when they bonked. They drank from bottles thrown by spectators. Modern reconstructions put 1970s in-race carbohydrate intake at around 30 to 40 grams per hour. 30 to 40. Pogačar's team, and I am quoting Tim Podlogar, the metabolism researcher who has worked with World Tour squads, feeds him in excess of 120 grams of carbohydrate per hour, with 1,200 grams across an entire mountain stage day. 3 times what Merckx had. Sometimes 4 times. That is the difference between bonking on the Galibier and attacking on the Galibier. And those carbohydrates are not just energy. They are engineered. Modern sports drinks combine glucose and fructose at a specific ratio, roughly 1 to 0.8, because that combination uses 2 separate intestinal transporters and pushes oxidation rates 50% higher than glucose alone. That is not nutrition. That is biochemical engineering. Now stack the recovery on top. Cold water immersion, pneumatic compression, heart rate variability monitoring, ketone esters, sleep protocols that cost more per night than most riders in the 70s earned in a week. Compare that to what passed for sports medicine in Merckx's era. On the 13th of July, 1967, the British rider Tom Simpson collapsed and died on Mont Ventoux after mixing amphetamines with brandy on one of the hottest stages in Tour history. His reputed last words, whispered to his mechanic, "Put me back on my bike." That was the medical environment Merckx raced inside. Stimulants treated as fuel, painkillers treated as recovery, fatal collapses treated as bad luck. So now we run the experiment. Scenario 1. Eddy Merckx, peak 1972, transplanted to 2026. He gets the 6.8 kilogram aero bike, the skin suit, the carbon helmet, 120 grams of dual-source carbohydrate per hour, altitude camps, heart rate variability monitoring, a metabolic scientist designing his intervals, a physical therapist working on the pelvic asymmetry that Blois left him with. What happens? Realistically, on the flat at 45 kilometers per hour, the machine alone gives him 50 to 70 watts for free. With modern polarized training, his threshold power probably climbs another 5 to 10%. With modern nutrition, he stops bonking in the third week of a grand tour. With modern bike fit, his chronic pelvic pain, the pain that ended his climbing, might be manageable for the first time since 1969. A modernized Merckx contends with Pogačar and Vingegaard, especially in time trials, and in the kind of opportunistic, aggressive raids that defined his racing DNA. But here is the human twist. Inigo San Millan, the metabolic scientist behind Pogačar, would probably spend half his energy just stopping Merckx from racing. The Cannibal who entered 195 races in a single year does not have a rest week button in his brain. The retrofit is cultural, as much as it is physiological. Scenario 2. The reverse. Pogačar dropped into 1972. He gets the 9.5 kilogram steel Colnago, the wool jersey, the leather hairnet helmet, 30 grams of carbohydrate per hour from a steak sandwich and a bottle of sugar water. No race radio, no power meter, no physical therapist, and a calendar of 150 to 200 race days a year, because that is how riders made a living. Mechanically, he loses 50 to 70 watts to the bike. Nutritionally, he bonks on mountain stages because his body has not been gut-trained to absorb fuel at high rates without intestinal distress. And here is the angle no other video on this topic is going to give you. Because this is the injury breakdown. Pogačar's racing style depends on repeated explosive accelerations. 3, 4, 5 attacks per climb. That kind of riding generates enormous orthopedic stress. Knee pain, lower backloading, nerve compression. In 2026, his medical team manages those risks with imaging, periodization, and structured return-to-ride protocols. In 1972, a study of Tour de France injuries from 2010 to 2017 found that 49% of abandonments were caused by acute fractures. Today, that means a titanium plate and a trainer in 3 days. In 1972, it meant a plaster cast and praying your bone healed straight. Strip out modern surgical technique. Strip out modern imaging. Strip out helmets that actually protect the brain. The genetic Pogačar still becomes a legend. But his career is shorter, spikier, punctuated by crashes that today would be footnotes, and back then were career enders. The inversion is brutal. Merckx in 2026 probably gets better than he ever was. Pogačar in 1972 probably gets less out of his physiology than we see today. Not because he is softer, because the environment wastes his advantages. So here is what I want you to take from this. When we compare Eddy Merckx to Tadej Pogacar, We are not really asking who is the better rider. We are asking how much of greatness belongs to the body, how much belongs to the bike, and how much belongs to the science that feeds the body and tunes the bike. The engine has barely changed. The biology of elite endurance is the same now as it was in 1972. What has changed is everything else. The wool became carbon fiber. The steak became glucose fructose at 1 to 0.8. The leather hairnet became modern impact-absorbing helmets. The Allen key in the jersey pocket became a motion capture laboratory. Eddy Merckx rode 49 kilometers in an hour with a twisted pelvis and a face dark purple from oxygen debt on a wooden track at altitude, and he survived. Tadej Pogacar will probably never need to test that limit, because his sport has built him a system designed to protect him from ever having to. Cycling has always asked the same question. How much pain can a human body absorb at 6 watts per kilogram? Merckx answered with 195 races a year, a permanently injured pelvis, and a leather helmet. Pogačar answers with altitude tents, structured recovery, and a metabolic team. Same question, different toolbox. The riders who survived to become legends were not the ones with the biggest engines. They were the ones whose bodies were given the best chance to keep showing up. The injury history is the story. The numbers on the mask are just the prologue. And if that question hooked you, the engine question, the ceiling question, the what-if question, then I have already taken it one step further. Because I asked myself this: what would happen if Tadej Pogacar, 4-time Tour de France winner, 12 monument victories, an estimated VO2 max of 96, stepped off the bike and ran a marathon tomorrow? In that video, I break down the full physiological case. The extraordinary engine Pogačar carries. The brutal science of running economy. What actually happens to elite cyclists when they try to run on flat ground. And 3 data-driven time predictions that will change how you think about athletic greatness. The link is on screen right now. I am Sebastian from the Injury Breakdown. See you on the next one.